Welcome to Life Stories, where real experiences challenge us to reflect, grow, and take action. Today's story follows Olivia Carter, a successful entrepreneur who walks into Summit National Bank expecting a routine meeting, only to face deliberate delays and quiet discrimination. But Olivia is no stranger to adversity. With patience, intelligence, and the right connections, she turns the situation around not just for herself, but for those who come after her. How does she do it? Stay tuned to find out. Subscribe to Life Stories and let's begin today's journey. The morning sun spilled through the glass walls of Summit National Bank, casting long beams of light across the polished marble floors. Olivia Carter adjusted the cuffs of her navy blazer, her fingers brushing against the smooth fabric as she took a steadying breath. She had prepared for this meeting meticulously, as she always did. Years of dedication, countless late nights, and an unwavering belief in her vision had brought her to this moment, a final meeting to secure funding for Ridgewood Heights. A real estate project that meant more than just business to her. It was personal. She stepped forward, her heels clicking with quiet confidence against the floor as she approached the front desk. The young woman stationed there glanced up with a professional but somewhat indifferent smile. "Good morning," Olivia said, keeping her tone warm. "I'm Olivia Carter. I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Mr. Harrison." The teller blinked, her eyes flicking to the computer screen before she hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Olivia noticed. She had encountered these pauses before. Subtle yet familiar. The teller's smile wavered before she quickly masked it with trained politeness. "Of course. Miss Carter," she said. "Please take a seat. And I'll notify Mr. Harrison that you've arrived." Olivia nodded and turned toward the waiting area, where sleek leather chairs lined the space. The air was crisp with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, and the hum of quiet conversations filled the lobby. She checked her watch. 9:55 a.m. Right on time. Settling into her seat, she smoothed her skirt and pulled out her phone. It wasn't nerves that had her scrolling through emails, it was habit. She had built her career on efficiency, ensuring that no opportunity for productivity was wasted. The meeting was supposed to be a mere formality. Her credit score was impeccable. Her portfolio was extensive. Her track record proved she was a calculated risk worth taking. But as the minutes ticked past, a strange tension began to settle in her chest. At 10:10 a.m., she glanced up from her phone and noticed the teller whispering to a colleague, occasionally stealing glances in her direction. "That's odd." A slight, familiar unease began to creep in. But Olivia forced herself to remain composed. Patience was a virtue, and she had learned early in life that composure was often her strongest weapon. By 10:30 a.m., she had had enough. She stood, adjusting the strap of her purse over her shoulder, and made her way back to the counter. Her voice was polite but firm. "Excuse me. I just wanted to confirm, has Mr. Harrison been informed that I'm here?" The teller looked startled, her fingers fumbling over the keyboard. "Yes. He's just finishing up some other tasks right now. He'll be with you shortly." Olivia studied her for a moment. She wasn't naive. She could read between the lines. But she offered a tight smile and returned to her seat. More customers walked in. Some were called up immediately. Others were greeted by bankers in tailored suits, shaking hands and being ushered into offices. Olivia remained seated, watching the rhythm of the bank move smoothly around her, except for her. At 11 a.m., frustration coiled in her stomach. She stood again, this time her voice carrying a sharper edge. "It's been an hour past my appointment time. I'd like to know what's causing the delay." The teller swallowed, clearly flustered, before picking up the phone. After a hushed conversation, she placed the receiver down and said, "Mr. Harrison will be out shortly." But shortly turned into another half hour. At 11:45 a.m., the bank manager finally emerged. Samuel Harrison was a middle-aged man with the air of someone who had never been made to wait. His navy suit was crisp, his silver watch gleaming under the overhead lights. He walked toward Olivia with a forced smile, though it never quite reached his eyes. "Ms. Carter. Apologies for the wait," he said smoothly, though his tone lacked any genuine remorse. "We've been swamped this morning." Olivia met his gaze, unblinking. "I had a 10 o'clock appointment," she said evenly. "It's now 11:45. I'd appreciate it if we could proceed." Harrison gestured toward his office. "Of course. Right this way." As Olivia followed him, she couldn't ignore the subtle looks exchanged between the staff. The unspoken tension that hung in the air. She had disrupted the natural order of this place, simply by expecting to be treated with the same professionalism as any other client. Inside the office, Harrison motioned for her to sit before he himself took his time settling in. He adjusted his papers, clicked his pen twice, then leaned back in his chair as if he had all the time in the world. "Now," he said, exhaling in an almost theatrical manner, "what can I do for you today?" "Ms. Carter." Olivia's patience stretched thin, held firm but barely. She laced her fingers together and spoke with the same clarity and precision she had honed over years of business dealings. "I believe you're already aware I'm here to finalize the loan for the Ridgewood Heights development. All the documents should be in your system." Harrison's eyes flicked to his computer screen. He clicked his mouse a few times, then leaned back again, folding his hands over his stomach. "Ah, yes. The Ridgewood Heights project. Quite an undertaking." "Yes, it is," Olivia responded, her tone steady. "But as you'll see, I've met every requirement. My business plan, financial records, and projections have all been reviewed and approved by your underwriting team. This is the final step." Harrison's lips curled into a thin smile. "I see. Well, these things take time. Ms. Carter, I like to take a personal look at these matters. You understand." Olivia did understand. She had seen this tactic before, a deliberate, insidious way to undermine her authority, to remind her that power still rested in his hands, no matter how prepared she was. But she wouldn't let him see her falter. She leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. "Take all the time you need," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "I'll wait right here." Harrison's smile flickered ever so slightly. And so, Olivia waited. The clock on the office wall ticked steadily, each passing second amplifying the tension that had settled thick in the room. Olivia Carter sat motionless, her back straight, her hands resting lightly on the armrests of the chair. She wasn't going to give Samuel Harrison the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. Across the desk, Harrison made a show of flipping through her documents, occasionally typing something on his computer. The leisurely pace of his movements was deliberate, a power play. He was the kind of man who thrived on making others wait, who found satisfaction in dragging out a process just to remind people who held the authority. Olivia, however, was no stranger to these unspoken games. She had been underestimated before, dismissed before. She had walked into rooms where people assumed she was the assistant, not the CEO. But she had never let any of it define her. As the minutes stretched, she watched him carefully. His fingers drummed against the desk. His eyes flickered over the screen without urgency. He was enjoying this. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice level, "I was informed that this loan was already approved, pending your signature. Is there a particular reason you feel the need to review everything again?" He didn't look up. "Just making sure there are no discrepancies." "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "It's standard procedure. I'm sure you understand." There it was again. That infuriating, patronizing tone. Olivia's fingers curled subtly against the leather armrest. But she willed herself to remain composed. "Of course," she said, her voice smooth. "Then I assume this same level of scrutiny is applied to all clients." That made Harrison pause. Just for a second. But it was enough. A flicker of something crossed his face before he masked it with his usual air of authority. He opened his mouth, perhaps ready with another excuse. But before he could speak, a knock sounded at the door. Both of them turned. The door cracked open slightly, and a young woman, Emma, peeked in hesitantly. Her eyes darted toward Olivia before settling on Harrison. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice careful. "The regional board members have just arrived for their meeting." A change swept over Harrison's face so quickly. Olivia might have missed it if she hadn't been watching closely. The lazy arrogance, the dismissive ease, all of it vanished in an instant. His posture straightened. His hands stilled. A thin bead of sweat formed at his temple. "Of course," he said quickly, smoothing his tie. "I'll be there shortly." Emma hesitated. She shifted slightly, glancing at Olivia again before speaking. "Actually," she said carefully, "one of the board members specifically asked to see Ms. Carter." A heavy silence settled in the office. Olivia's eyebrows lifted slightly. Now that was interesting. She didn't react immediately, allowing the weight of the moment to sink in. Across from her, Harrison's expression darkened ever so slightly, his discomfort now palpable. It took him a second too long to recover. "It seems you have quite the connections, Miss Carter," he said, his voice tight. Olivia met his gaze, offering a small, knowing smile. "Yes," she said, rising gracefully to her feet. "It seems I do." She stepped past Harrison, moving toward the door where Emma waited. The young woman shifted slightly to the side, her expression unreadable. But Olivia caught the slight flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew. As Olivia stepped into the hallway, she could feel the shift in the air. The tension wasn't just inside that office, it had spread. Employees cast quick glances in her direction, some curious, some wary. Behind her, Harrison's footsteps were sharp and hurried against the marble floors as he followed. The bank lobby was noticeably quieter than before, the usual hum of conversation subdued as staff members exchanged furtive glances. At the far end of the room, the glass doors leading to the executive conference room were propped open. Inside, a group of impeccably dressed board members stood engaged in animated conversation. And at the center of them stood Jonathan Whitmore. Even from across the room, his presence was undeniable. A tall, silver-haired man with the air of someone who commanded respect without demanding it. When he spotted Olivia, his face broke into a genuine smile, one filled with warmth and familiarity. "Olivia," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the space. "It's been too long." A small ripple of murmurs moved through the bank as heads turned. The weight of his greeting wasn't lost on anyone. Olivia smiled, stepping forward with deliberate ease. "Jonathan," she said, returning his warmth. "It has indeed." As she approached, Whitmore extended his hand, but instead of shaking it, Olivia gave him a brief but heartfelt hug. The other board members exchanged curious glances. They weren't just watching, they were intrigued. "Thomas, you're looking well," Olivia said, stepping back. "And you're as sharp as ever," Whitmore responded, gesturing toward a chair. "Please, have a seat." Then, almost casually, he added, "I hope Mr. Harrison has been taking good care of you." The question was innocent enough, but there was a slight edge to Whitmore's voice. The way his gaze drifted toward Harrison made it clear he suspected otherwise. A beat of silence stretched between them. Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes locking with Harrison's. His expression was stiff. His hands fidgeted at his sides. Olivia turned back to Whitmore and, with a slight tilt of her head, offered a smooth, measured response. "Let's just say," she said, diplomatically, "the morning has been eventful." Whitmore's brows furrowed slightly, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he turned to the other board members. "Everyone," he announced, "I'd like to introduce you to Olivia Carter, one of the sharpest minds in real estate development." Her Ridgewood Heights project is exactly the kind of forward-thinking investment we need. A round of warm greetings followed. Some of the board members nodded in recognition, clearly already familiar with her work. Behind them, Harrison hovered awkwardly near the doorway, grasping at control that had already slipped through his fingers. Yes, he cut in, his voice tight. Olivia and I were just finalizing the details of her loan application. He forced a smile. It's a complex project, and I was ensuring all due diligence was completed. Olivia glanced at him, her expression unreadable. That's an interesting way to describe it, she said. Her tone neutral, but laced with quiet challenge. A subtle tension settled over the boardroom, like the stillness before a storm. Jonathan Whitmore, ever the composed statesman, studied Samuel Harrison with an unreadable expression. The other board members exchanged quick, knowing glances. Olivia could sense it, the shift in power. She straightened her posture, keeping her voice poised. Mr. Harrison has certainly taken his time ensuring every step of the process was carefully examined. The room fell silent for a moment. Then, Whitmore's sharp gaze flickered toward Harrison. Meticulous, you say? Whitmore's tone was light, but his words carried weight. Olivia, did you have an appointment scheduled for this morning? Yes, she answered without hesitation. At 10 a.m. I arrived early. Whitmore's expression didn't change. And what time is it now? Olivia glanced at her watch. Nearly 1 p.m. A murmur rippled through the room. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, some raising their eyebrows, others sharing disapproving looks. The silence that followed was more damning than any accusation. Whitmore turned back to Harrison, his expression calm but deliberate. Samuel, he said evenly, I trust there's a very good reason why one of our most promising clients was left waiting for 3 hours. A beat of silence stretched between them. Harrison opened his mouth, then closed it again. His face flushed, his usual air of superiority now replaced by discomfort. I was ensuring everything was in order, he stammered finally, though the conviction in his voice was noticeably absent. Whitmore didn't even blink. Is that so? He turned back to Olivia. And from your perspective, how has the process been? Olivia exhaled, choosing her words carefully. She knew she had one. But this wasn't just about personal victory, it was about principle. I've found the underwriting team to be thorough and efficient, she began. Then, after a deliberate pause, she added, however, the final steps of this process have been unnecessarily delayed. The statement landed heavily in the room. Harrison shifted again, his hands twitching at his sides. I assure you, Mr. Whitmore. Harrison cut in, his voice tight. I was simply following protocol. We have to ensure all procedures are followed to the letter. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together in thought. Then, finally, he nodded once. Samuel, would you excuse us for a moment? Harrison froze. His eyes darted toward the other board members, as if searching for an ally. But no one met his gaze. Of course, he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. He stood, adjusting his suit jacket with stiff fingers, then walked out of the boardroom without another word. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, Whitmore let out a slow breath. His expression softened as he turned back to Olivia. First and foremost, he said, his voice now warmer, I'd like to personally apologize for the way this was handled. That is not reflective of the standards we hold at Summit National Bank. Olivia met his gaze, her posture unwavering. I appreciate that, she said. I've always believed in this bank's potential to be a leader in community investment. I only hope we can work together to make that vision a reality. Whitmore nodded firmly. Absolutely. And as for the Ridgewood Heights project, he exchanged a quick glance with the other board members before continuing. I'll personally ensure that the paperwork is expedited. Consider the loan approved. For the first time that day, Olivia felt the weight of frustration lift from her shoulders. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Thank you, Jonathan. That means a great deal. As the meeting concluded, Olivia shook hands with the board members, each one expressing their admiration for her work. Some even voiced their support for future collaborations. But the real victory wasn't just the lone approval, it was the message that had been sent. As she stepped out of the conference room, she noticed a few employees discreetly watching from a distance. Some looked wary, others approving, and one, in particular, stood out: Emma, the junior employee who had called for her earlier. Emma hesitated, then took a small step forward. "Miss Carter," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how you were treated earlier. It wasn't right." Olivia studied her for a moment, then placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for speaking up, Emma," she said. "It takes courage to do the right thing, even when it's not easy." Emma's face brightened slightly, as if the weight of unspoken guilt had been lifted. As Olivia turned toward the exit, her stride was purposeful, confident. This wasn't just a victory for her. It was a step toward something greater. As Olivia Carter stepped out of Summit National Bank, she felt a deep sense of triumph, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or made to feel invisible. She had walked in expecting a simple transaction, but the day had become a stark reminder of the barriers that still existed. Yet, instead of frustration, Olivia felt renewed purpose. She had turned an experience of discrimination into an opportunity for systemic change. Change wasn't just about winning battles, it was about building better systems. And Olivia knew she wasn't done yet. As she got into her car, she smiled to herself. This was only the beginning. Would you stand up for change in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more real stories that inspire action and hope.